On January 10, 2019, Zara made the biggest mistake of her life. She slept with a criminal. She didn't know that then, of course. On that night, she only knew that he was the most beautiful man she had ever seen, and that he was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. The club was called Noir. Itaewon, Seoul. Zara had been in Korea for exactly 3 days on a student exchange program, and her roommate Adiz had dragged her out to celebrate her arrival with overpriced cocktails and music she couldn't place. Zara didn't want to be there. She was nursing a glass of something pink and watching other people have fun when she felt it. That specific prickling at the back of her neck that meant someone was staring. She turned. He was standing across the room near a private booth, surrounded by men in dark suits who all seemed to be orbiting him the way planets orbit a star. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that were doing something dangerous from that distance. Korean, late 20s maybe, and he was looking directly at her. She looked away. He crossed the room anyway. "You look like you don't want to be here," he said in English. His accent was thick but deliberate, like a man who chose every word carefully. "I don't," she said honestly. He smiled, just barely. "Then let me give you a reason to stay." His name was Kwon Ji-hoon. He told her he was in investment holdings. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He had the confidence of a man who owned things. Restaurants, conversations, rooms. He ordered a bottle of champagne she hadn't heard of and spoke to the staff with quiet authority. Then took her to a rooftop at 2 in the morning, where Seoul spread out below them like a circuit board lit up in gold. He asked her questions and actually listened to the answers. He laughed at her jokes. And when he touched the back of her hand once, she felt it everywhere. By the end of that first night, Zara knew she was in serious trouble. The week that followed was the kind of week that ruins ordinary life for a person. He took her to a restaurant where there was no menu. The chef simply cooked whatever Ji-hoon told him to. He took her to a private gallery after hours, just the two of them, and walked her through paintings she'd never have found on a tourist map. He drove too fast and laughed when she screamed and kept his hand steady on the wheel like speed was something he'd made peace with long ago. He called her Zarya, the Korean honorific attached to her name like he'd decided she already belonged to him. She fell. She fell completely and helplessly and without a parachute. On the 6th night, she stayed. On the 7th morning, she woke up alone in a hotel suite that cost more per night than her monthly rent in Lagos. And while she was gathering herself, she made the mistake of opening the wrong drawer looking for a phone charger. What she found instead was a photograph. A man, beaten, zip-tied to a chair, and Ji-hoon standing behind him, gun in hand, looking at the camera with no expression at all. She put it back. Her hands were shaking. She left before he returned. She packed her bag in 11 minutes, took a cab to her campus dormitory, and spent the rest of her exchange program telling herself she had imagined what she saw, that there was a reasonable explanation, that the man who had memorized her coffee order and kissed her forehead in his sleep could not possibly be what that photograph suggested. But denial never lasts. Eventually, she had to face the truth. Ji-hoon was not an investor. He was the head of a criminal organization with suspected ties to illegal arms brokering, money laundering through entertainment venues, and a history of making legal problems disappear. No convictions. Not a single one. She went back to Nigeria at the end of the month. 6 weeks later, she took a pregnancy test. It was positive. Welcome back to the home of stories that pull you in, keep you up at night, and leave you wanting more. If you're watching this story, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and follow so you never miss what happens next. Let's see how far this story travels. Zara told no one who the father was. Not her mother. Not Adiz. Not a single soul. She said it was a man from the program who had gone back to his country, that it was complicated, that she'd handle it. And she did handle it, in the way Zara had always handled things. Jaw set, chin up. No room in her schedule for falling apart. She named him Kofi. He was born in March 2020, in the middle of a pandemic in a Lagos hospital where the power cut twice. He came out screaming like he had opinions about the world already. He had his father's eyes. Every time she looked at him, she felt two things simultaneously. The purest love she had ever experienced, and a fear so quiet and persistent it had become like background noise. Because those eyes, dark and sharp and assessing, belonged to a man she didn't fully know. She blocked every number she had for Ji-hoon, deleted every photo, built her life in layers, a degree, a graduate program, a junior position at an architecture firm in Lagos. She made herself busy enough that the grief of that week in Seoul couldn't find a corner to settle in. Kofi grew into a bright, chaotic, endlessly curious 5-year-old who loved dinosaurs and had strong opinions about breakfast. Zara loved him so fiercely it sometimes felt physical, like armor she wore around her heart. She was doing perfectly fine, until the email arrived. Hanum Design Group, Seoul. The email was professional, warm, detailed. They had seen her portfolio. Her graduate thesis on adaptive housing structures had apparently circulated in certain design circles, and they were offering her a junior associate position with a starting salary that made her sit back in her chair and stare at the ceiling. 6 months initial contract. Accommodation provided. International relocation support. She almost said no. Korea felt like a door she had closed and locked and pushed a wardrobe against. But the salary was real. The company had a legitimate website and a verifiable portfolio. 3 people in her professional network had heard of them. She had bills. Kofi would start primary school next year, and the school she wanted for him cost money she didn't currently have. Her mother kept saying, "Zara, you can't run from opportunity." She told herself it was a big city. Jihoon was one man. 6 years had passed. People moved on. She arrived at Incheon International on a Thursday afternoon in April 2025 with Kofi asleep on her shoulder. Her carry-on packed with the quiet optimism of someone trying to believe in their own fresh start. A driver was meant to be waiting with her name on a card. There was a driver. There was a card with her name on it. There were also 3 other men. It happened quickly, the way these things always do in hindsight. Fast and smooth and over before her brain had processed what her body already knew. A cloth over Kofi's face. A hand at her back. A voice saying in accented English, "Don't scream. The boy is fine. He will stay fine." She didn't scream. She was too busy calculating. Exits, people nearby, whether Kofi was awake. He wasn't. The boy slept through anything. She kept her eyes on him the entire ride and did not cry. Not once, because crying was a luxury and right now she needed every functioning brain cell she had. The car stopped at a building that looked, from the outside, like a high-end residential complex in Gangnam. They were taken upstairs in a private elevator. The apartment was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, furnished in the kind of restrained luxury that didn't need to announce itself. They put Kofi on a couch. A blanket appeared, tucked around him by a woman in a white uniform who Zara clocked immediately as medical staff. After she'd made sure Kofi was okay, Zara turned around. Kwon Ji-hoon was standing 10 feet away, watching her. He was 30 now. The years had done nothing to soften him. If anything, they had settled into him, sharpened the lines of his face, added weight to the stillness he'd always carried. He was wearing a dark suit with no tie, collar open, like a man who had just come from somewhere important. He looked exactly the same. He also looked at her like no time had passed at all. "Zara," he said, just her name, the way he'd always said it. She slapped him. Ji-hoon didn't flinch. He didn't grab her wrist or step back. He just let it happen. And then he looked at her with something in his expression she couldn't immediately name. "You faked the job," she said. Her voice was shaking but her eyes weren't. "Yes. You had us kidnapped. I had you brought here safely. My son was with me. He was asleep. He'll wake up in an hour, perfectly healthy. And he will have a room full of toys and a nurse to look after him." A pause. "I know that doesn't make it right. I know that." The honesty of that last sentence knocked her off balance for half a second, which was long enough for him to see it. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her steadily. "You know why. Say it." "Because you disappeared," he said. "Because you were there and then you were gone and you left nothing. No message. No explanation. I had your number for 3 days before it stopped working." A pause. "And because you took something with you when you left." Her stomach dropped. "You knew. I've known for 5 years." She thought of all the careful erasure she had done. The blocked numbers. The deleted accounts. The years of deliberate invisibility. "How? Does it matter?" "It matters to me. I had people watching," he said simply. "Not intrusively. I wasn't following you. I just needed to know you were safe." He looked toward the couch where Kofi was sleeping, and something moved through his face that she recognized despite herself. "And I needed to see him." Zara looked at her son. Then she looked back at the man who was his father. "I want to leave," she said. "Both of us. Tonight. You can leave whenever you want. The door isn't locked. There's a car available to you at all times." He paused. "But my son stays." She laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. "Excuse me? You heard me. He's my son. You have never met him." I know. His jaw tightened. I know that. And I know you made a choice when you found out who I was. I'm not going to tell you it was the wrong choice. Another pause, and the restraint in it cost him something. She could see it. But I am telling you that I will not let him grow up not knowing me. You can hate me for how this was done. That's fair. But he is my son, and he stays. Zara stood very still for a long moment. Then she sat down in the chair nearest to Kofi's couch and said, "Then I'm not going anywhere without him. So I guess neither of us is leaving." Ji-hoon looked at her for a long moment. For just a second, something almost like relief flickered across his face. Kofi woke up 40 minutes later asking for his dinosaur coloring book. It was in her carry-on, which had been brought upstairs without her having to ask. She retrieved it, handed it to him, and watched him blink at the room with the easy adaptability of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of unfamiliar places. "Mummy," he said, looking around, "this place is very big." "It is," she agreed. "Is it a hotel?" "Sort of." He looked toward the window where the Han River glittered in the afternoon light. "Is that a river?" "Yes." "Can we see it?" "Maybe later." He accepted this and returned to his coloring book. Across the room, she was aware of Ji-hoon standing very still, watching his son color a stegosaurus green and yellow. Kofi looked up at him eventually, the way children always notice the thing the adults are pretending not to notice. He studied Ji-hoon with the same unsettling directness the man himself possessed. "Are you Korean?" Kofi asked. "Yes. My mummy went to Korea before I was born. She has a picture of Seoul on her wall." He thought about this. "Are you from Seoul?" "Yes." "Do you know all the buildings?" Ji-hoon blinked. For the first time since Zara had arrived, something human and slightly undone moved across his face. "Not all of them. My mummy does. She's an architect. She knows loads of buildings." Kofi returned to his coloring. "You can sit down if you want. There's space." He sat. Not at the far end of the large sofa, but right in the middle, close enough that Kofi had to make room. Which Kofi did, without complaint, shifting his book and his pencils and his complete lack of self-consciousness. Zara watched her son and his father sit beside each other for the first time. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm hard enough to feel it. She could not afford to soften. She could not afford to let this look like anything other than what it was. A man who had used money and power and criminal reach to take something that wasn't his to take. The fact that the something was his own child did not change the method. But Kofi was already asking him which color a Tyrannosaurus Rex should be. And Ji-hoon, this man who made people disappear, was saying very seriously, "I think they were probably green or gray." "I think orange," Kofi said. "Then orange," Ji-hoon said. Zara looked away before she felt anything else. She set her terms on day 2. Kofi would not see or hear anything related to his father's business. He would have a routine meals, a designated play area, a learning schedule she would manage herself. He would not be used as leverage in any negotiation. Ever. He would be treated like a child, not an asset. Ji-hoon agreed to every point without argument. "You expected me to fight you," he said, reading her expression. "You fight about everything else. Not about him." He said it with a quietness that had no performance in it. Never about him. Life in the apartment settled into something that felt, uncomfortably, like domesticity. There was a full household staff, discreet, professional. A chef who made Kofi's zagusi soup from scratch after Zara described it once. A study where Zara worked on her own projects, because she was not going to let her brain atrophy in a gilded cage. Ji-hoon made sure she had everything: software, reference books, a printer, a drafting table he apparently had delivered overnight. She didn't thank him for the drafting table. She used it every day. Ji-hoon was gone most mornings before she woke. He returned in the evenings. The first few times he came back to find Kofi still awake, there was a moment of visible recalibration. The hard edges of a man coming back from whatever his day had been, meeting the soft chaos of a 5-year-old who immediately wanted to tell him something about dinosaurs. He always stopped. He always listened. She watched him learn how to be in the same room as a child, and felt something inside her she did not want to name. It was a Wednesday night, Kofi long asleep, the city below the window blinking its patient light. She found Ji-hoon on the balcony. Jacket off, elbows on the railing, looking at nothing in particular. She should have gone back inside. She went to the railing instead. They stood in silence for a while, which was its own kind of language. "How did you end up in all of this?" she asked finally. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Mapo-gu," he said. Southwest Seoul. It's different now, gentrified. But when I was small, it was rough in the way that places get rough when no one important lives there. A pause. My father was killed when I was 9. A dispute between two neighborhood crews over who owned which corner. He wasn't even involved. He was coming home from work. Another pause, longer. My mother tried. She worked 3 jobs. Then she got sick, and she couldn't afford to stop working because we couldn't eat if she stopped. She died when I was 14 from something that should have been treatable. He said it without inflection, which made it worse. After that, I was on the street. And on the street, you survive by being the most dangerous thing around. Or you don't survive. I was very good at surviving. He looked at his hands on the railing. By 20, I had territory. By 23, I had the whole structure. I want you to know this, I never touched civilians. I had rules. I still have rules. That doesn't make it clean. I know that. The photograph I found, Zara said carefully. In the drawer. He exhaled. That man had sold information about one of my operations to someone who used it to try to have 3 of my people killed. A pause. He's alive. Unpleasant. Missing some teeth. But alive. Zara thought about this. I left because I was scared, she said. But not only of what you were. Part of me just wanted to put the photograph back and pretend I hadn't seen it. And that part scared me more than the photograph did. I couldn't compromise my morals for anyone. I still can't. Ji-hoon turned to look at her. In the low light from the city, his face was very still. I know, he said. I was angry for about 2 years. Then I found out about Kofi. And I couldn't be angry anymore. I just thought, she's protecting him. She's doing what mothers do. He looked back at the river. I couldn't be angry at you for choosing him. Zara took a breath and stepped back from the railing. I'm going to bed. Good night, Zara. She stopped walking but didn't turn around. Good night, Ji-hoon. The problem with being around a person you once loved, fully catastrophically, in the way you love things before you learn to protect yourself, is that your body remembers before your mind gives permission. She knew it was him before she heard him walk into a room. She tracked him without trying to. She noticed when he was tired, when something during his day had been harder than usual, when the careful control he kept around himself was thinner than normal. She noticed these things the way you notice the weather without choosing to look at the sky. And she was furious at herself for it. Adiz, reached via voice note, said, Girl, what do you mean? He looked at you and your whole system rebooted? That's not what I said. That's the subtext of everything you said. Zara put her phone face down and stared at the drafting table. She thought about what she wanted. Not in the abstract, but in the specific granular truth of this apartment, this city, this man who was currently downstairs teaching her son how to fold a paper crane. She wanted, despite every reasonable objection she could construct, to not leave. She thought about Kofi, who had started running to Ji-hoon when he heard the elevator, who said Appa on day 11 without any prompting, and Ji-hoon had gone very still, then excused himself for 10 minutes, and come back with his eyes slightly red and pretended nothing had happened. She thought about the drafting table, the chef who learned her recipes, the way Ji-hoon had said she's protecting him without any bitterness. But one thing was not conflicted. One thing was clear and non-negotiable. Kofi would not grow up in this. He would not grow up watching his father move through a world built on violence and fear. He deserved better than that, and Zara would burn every feeling she had to ash before she let him inherit that world. She went downstairs. The paper crane Ji-hoon had made for Kofi was, objectively, quite good, and Kofi was crowing about it. Ji-hoon looked up when she entered and waited. We need to talk, she said. About the future. When they got to a private room, she asked him directly, Is this forever? The life you're in? Is this your plan for the rest of it? He was quiet. Because I can't. She stopped, then started again. I can love you, Ji-hoon. I'm not going to pretend I don't. I think you can probably see that I... She pressed her palms together. But I cannot let Kofi grow up in this. And if I'm here and you're here, and this is what you are, then he grows up in it regardless. You understand. He looked at his hands for a long moment. What you're really asking, he said slowly, is whether I would change. I'm asking if it's possible. Most people wouldn't ask. They'd assume the answer and make a decision. I'm not most people. No, he said quietly. You're not. He looked up at her. I've been thinking about it for 2 years. Longer, maybe. The organization has assets, legitimate ones. Properties, entertainment venues, Import infrastructure that was always designed as a front but is actually profitable as a real business. I've been quietly moving things, restructuring, pulling back from operations that can't be converted into something legal. Pause. It's not fast, and it's not safe to go fast. If I cut everything off at once, there are people who would interpret that as weakness and try a power grab. It would start a war I don't want. He looked at her steadily. But it's possible. I believe it's possible. She searched his face for the tell of a man saying what she needed to hear. She knew how to read people. Her whole career was built on understanding what a structure needed to be sound. She looked at him and saw nothing but honesty. Then I have one more condition, she said. When it's done, when the transition is real and not theoretical, Kofi knows the truth. Not the details. Not the worst of it. But he knows who his father was, and what his father chose to become instead. He doesn't grow up with a lie. She held his gaze. He deserves a father he can be proud of. I'm telling you that I believe you can be that. But you have to do the work. Ji-hoon looked at her for a long time. You would stay? He asked. If I do the work? If you do the work, she said. And if you never lie to me about how it's going, yes, I would stay. Something in him changed. Not dramatically. He was not a dramatic man. But it shifted, deep and settled, like a foundation resetting itself. Okay, he said. Took 14 months. There were setbacks. A business partner who responded to the restructuring with hostility that turned briefly physical. Ji-hoon mentioned it 2 weeks later, offhandedly, and Zara was furious that he'd almost glossed over it. Their worst argument happened in the kitchen at midnight while Kofi slept above them. He said he was trying to protect her. She said she had explicitly told him not to do that. He said old habits. She said break them then. He did. Zara started working. She took on a freelance contract with a real architecture firm, Hanum Design Group, the same name that had been borrowed for the fake job offer. When she contacted them directly, they were intrigued. Then they offered her part-time consulting work that turned into something more significant. She was good at her job. She had always been. Kofi started at an international school in Gangnam. He made 2 best friends in the first week, a Korean boy named Juno, and a half-British, half-Ghanaian girl named Senna who also, coincidentally, loved dinosaurs, and came home every day with stories that took 45 minutes to tell. Ji-hoon showed up to every school event. He sat in the small plastic chairs made for parents and watched Kofi's class perform, and afterward Kofi ran to him with a paper moon he had decorated and said, I made it for you, Appa, and Ji-hoon held it like it was something rare and irreplaceable, which, to him, it was. Zara watched from across the courtyard and let herself feel, without apologizing for it, that this was something she wanted to keep. He did not tell her he loved her until month 9. He said it plainly, without preamble, on a Sunday morning while she was making tea and he was reading at the kitchen table, as if it was a fact he had simply decided to stop not saying. She said, without turning around, I know. I love you too. He was quiet for a moment. Just like that. Ji-hoon. She turned around. I have loved you since a rooftop in Itaewon in 2019. I've just been very, very busy being sensible about it. He made a sound she had never heard from him before. It took her a moment to identify it as laughter. Real laughter, the kind that had no composure in it. She looked at him laughing and thought, there he is, the person under all of it. The boy from Mapogu who had survived by becoming the most dangerous thing in the room, and had never, until now, been given a reason to put the armor down. The formal announcement came on a Tuesday in June 2026. Kwon Group Holdings, the legitimate restructuring of everything Ji-hoon owned, launched publicly as a diversified investment and property company with entertainment, hospitality, and logistics divisions. Not a small operation. The entertainment venues alone made it one of the mid-tier players in the Korean leisure sector. The people who had worked with him in the old structure either transitioned into legitimate roles or were quietly bought out. The ones who couldn't be transitioned were separated from the organization in ways that didn't create enemies. He had done it carefully. There was still risk. There was always still risk in the category of things you cannot fully undo. But the operational criminal enterprise was, for the first time, genuinely behind him. He came home that evening with a bottle of something expensive and found Zara and Kofi at the dining table working on a 5,000-piece puzzle. A map of the world, which Kofi had insisted on because he decided he wanted to visit every country and was approaching this ambition very systematically. Is it done? She asked. It's done. She looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way she read buildings. Foundation sound. Structure solid. Something new and clean in the lines of his face, like a man who had stopped bracing for impact. "Congratulations," she said softly. Kofi looked up from the puzzle. "What's done?" Ji-hoon set the bottle down and sat in the empty chair at the table. He looked at his son, then at Zara. She gave him the smallest nod. "I'll tell you a story," Ji-hoon said. "About a boy who grew up in a very hard neighborhood and made choices that helped him survive but weren't always good ones. And about how he decided to change." Kofi put down his puzzle piece. "Is it about you?" "Yes." "Is it sad?" "Some of it. But it has a good ending." "I like good endings," Kofi announced, and settled back into his chair and listened. On June 10, 2026, Zara stood at the window of an office in Gangnam that had her name on the door. Associate Architect. The view was of the city she had once fled and returned to and, somehow, made her own. Her phone buzzed. "Tonight. Dinner. The place we're going doesn't have a menu. Dress for something good." She smiled at the message for longer than she would admit to Adiz, who she would later describe the evening to in a 40-minute voice note that Adiz would summarize, brutally, as, "Girl, you are so gone. You have been so gone this whole time." She wasn't wrong. That evening, in a restaurant where the chef simply cooked what he was told, Ji-hoon placed something on the table between the second and third course. A small box. No performance. No kneeling. He was not, and would never be, a man who performed. He simply looked at her across the candlelight with the steadiness of someone who had dismantled an empire and rebuilt himself from scratch for the right reasons, and waited. Zara looked at the box. Then she looked at him. Then she smiled and said yes. Vault family. Share this with one person who needs a story today. Like, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe, turn the bell on, so you don't miss the next story. Would you have stayed? I'm your host. This is Afro-Korean Stories, and we are just getting started.